welcome everyone to this final session of this AI Academy for 2020, developing AI at scale. It's going to be a little bit a different session than what we've done before. I'm going to explain it all in a bit. I'm first going to ask Justin, the founder of Digital Leadership Forum, to open the meeting and share some words of wisdom with us. Justin?
Thanks, Katja. Welcome, everybody. This is the last in the current AI Training Academy series, and we're really grateful for everybody who's come along to all of the different sessions, and very much looking forward to hearing from all the different individual experts this morning. And obviously a big thank you to Chris and the Intel team for all of their support for this initiative. We will be doing more AI activities through the Digital Leadership Forum, and we will be confirming the exact nature of those in due course. How you scale AI and how you apply it in a responsible way across your organization, making the most of the challenges and minimizing the risks, is a major challenge. And I think it's fair to say that the industry is still at a relatively nascent stage, yet there is a lot of interest building in how you can apply AI. And what we're really pleased about today is that we've managed to bring together the contributors who've contributed during different sessions of the AI Training Academy. So this is a wonderful opportunity for you to catch up, ask questions, and refresh your knowledge, and get real-time insights into any questions you might have about rolling out AI and machine learning models. So I'm very much looking forward to today. I mean, our aim at the Digital Leadership Forum is to help you innovate, learn and grow in the age of AI. So I very much hope that this session enables you to innovate and grow as a company. So I would encourage you all to please get stuck into the chat, the questions, the polls, and that will make it a more enriching experience for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. And following up on that, also welcome to all the new joiners. We still have people joining in, so welcome to everyone who have just joined during Justin's talk as well. Today it's going to be a little bit different than the previous sessions, as Justin also mentioned and I mentioned before. So what we have today is we're going to have two panel discussions. We'll start with Chris, who's going to give us an overview presentation, and then we'll have two panel discussions. Like Justin said, the people who have been presenting us, who have been sharing their knowledge in our previous sessions, will join us in those panels. So we're going to have two panels in a moment, but first I'm going to hand over to Chris, who's going to give us a bit of an overview on what we've done over the past few months.
I get the feeling you were about to say the last few weeks and then change yourself to say months. We've all kind of lost track of time. Time has lost all meaning. This period of virtual time that we've all been sharing. So yeah, thanks for the time. And really this is, just wanted to take 15 minutes or so just to kind of pick up on, some of the things that I think have stood out over the last 5, 6 sessions. There's been some really interesting stuff, and hopefully people have taken some real value from this. There are some things that have stood out to me though as being, stuff that people seem most engaged about, the kind of nuggets that really stuck in people's minds or my mind. So just wanted to share those, and hopefully that's useful as a kind of a form of recap, and thanks for all the feedback on what we should be looking at next. Just to add to Justin's thanks though, I obviously just want to add our thanks as well, particularly to everyone who's attended and stayed so engaged. I think when we put this together and we were talking about 2-hour sessions, we were really concerned about whether people would really stay with us for 2 hours, especially on a virtual session. And honestly, it's made our life so much easier that you've all stayed with us and you've stayed engaged, you've asked questions. There's nothing worse than talking to an empty room or an empty virtual room. So we really appreciate your time. So thank you for that. And of course, thank you to all the other expert speakers that have given up all their time to help their peers learn, and also to the steering group who aren't really attending these sessions, but we took a lot of guidance from them in the early days in terms of what they think we should be sharing. So, really just a very brief thank you from me on that front. Moving on, and really just got a handful of slides on again, for me, what stood out as the most, common themes. And the first one was really around outcomes, and a number of things here. One was, we heard time and time again, I think, that one of the key things is to, avoid the temptation to creep. Be very clear on what the outcome is for the work that you're going to do. What does success look like? And it's okay to evolve and to adjust, but try and stay focused, because otherwise, it's a constant moving target. And it's okay if the desired outcome is simply to learn about AI. The outcome might not be to solve a business problem on day one. That's okay, as long as everyone's on board and understands that that's the outcome. And if the outcome is to solve a particular problem, don't be tempted to try and, creep and start addressing other problems as well. Be clear, be focused, make sure you succeed at the thing you've said you're going to succeed on, particularly in the early days when it's really important to get people's buy-in for AI. Small victories are possibly more valuable than one big one. You might get there quicker, and it just helps to build that confidence and that success. So be clear and avoid creep, but also think about the undesired outcomes that might happen. And sometimes those are things you can predict. Oftentimes there'll be things you can't predict. And of course, when you've got predictable things, you can have a plan to deal with those. But really important to think about what's your methodology going to be to deal with the things you didn't think of, that you couldn't foresee. And I think there's plenty of examples of this in the real world. And Amazon is a fairly famous one. They were fairly public about this hiring algorithm they were using to monitor or to analyze people's CVs and resumes for jobs. And they were trying to teach this system to filter all of the thousands and thousands of CVs they had. And, quite unintentionally, the system started, favoring male applicants. And really because they trained the system on what previous holders of those roles looked like, and they happened to be male. And so not by design, but by accident, the system started looking for traits that would identify men. And clearly that's an undesirable outcome. And they didn't predict that, but that's okay. They made a mistake, they realized it, they corrected, and they adjusted. Another famous example was Microsoft's chatbot, Tay. I don't know if people are remembering of that, but this virtual chatbot that anybody could interact with, and within just 24 hours of being exposed to people on the web, this virtual chatbot became this, racist, xenophobic monster. And I sat next to a guy from Microsoft at another AI event, and he was telling me that the decision about whether to turn this thing off and save the, public PR, or to leave it on because it was useful in gathering information, went all the way up to Satya Nadella, went to the CEO in that case. And the point was, they didn't know what to do. It was like, oh my God, we didn't see this coming. What do we do as a result of this undesired outcome? So of course you can't predict everything, but predict what you can. And for those things that might happen that aren't predictable, just be clear how you're going to handle those. Make sure you don't kind of get caught on the back foot. So outcomes is really important. Second thing is something I use a lot with people when we're talking about AI, which I call 3 A's. And the A's are ability, authority, and accountability. And in my experience, a lot of the decisions around AI fall into, these 3 categories. And the first one is ability. Can you train a system? Can you build a system to do what you need it to do? And can it do it accurately and consistency at the right speed and pace? That's the first question. If you can't do that, then the rest of the program potentially stops. But ability is the first thing. Authority is the second thing. Given an ability, what are you actually going to allow that system to do? What decisions can the system make? What decisions can it not make? And how does that authority intersect with human authority that exists already? How does that plug into existing processes? How is it going to change that? And in conflict, who has the deciding vote? And third is accountability, right? You clearly can't hold an AI accountable for mistakes. So in the event that there is a problem, who is going to be held accountable? Now that could be financial accountability, if there's a cost associated with a bad decision or a bad outcome. It could be legally, it could be morally. We heard a lot about the ethics and the legalities of AI. And again, these are all things it's important to understand, before you get to that situation. So I find, these 3 A's are a pretty good checklist for a lot of the concerns that people have. Can it do what we want? Are we going to allow it to do those things? And if something goes wrong, who's accountable, right? These are all really good things to make sure you have a handle on before you start. Next is transferability. And you'll see a lot of AI examples, and I wanted to share one particular one here with you, very high level. Intel's obviously a technology manufacturer. We have a group that's responsible for building the processors, the technology that sits in all of our PCs and servers and all the rest of it. And part of that process is there's a visual check, right? What you see here is a processor. That's what it looks like. And part of the process of building that device is that engineers will physically look at these things and spot defects. There are 11 different criteria they look for faults. And clearly, that's a problem that we can use AI to solve. They solve 70% of the time by taking that role away from people and giving it to an AI. Now, the question is, this is a problem that's been solved for a company where a factory costs billions and billions of dollars. Now, does that mean that's not a relevant solution for another manufacturer? Well, actually, of course not, because at its core, that's an image recognition problem. We happen to be using it in $1 billion factory to look at processes. But if you strip away that kind of veneer of our industry and our particular use case, the underlying technology is image recognition. And a lot of the time, you can transfer that capability between use cases and between industries. So the encouragement is, look at what people are doing in other industries. Don't just look at your own. Look at other use cases that feel similar to yours. They're probably different, but they might be 70% the same. So learn from what other industries are doing that looks like the problem you're trying to solve. You can save yourself a lot of time here. You can learn a lot. So don't be put off if the specific use case doesn't seem directly applicable to you. And then skills. So, skills is talked about a lot in AI, and you hear a lot about data scientists and data engineers, and there's this thing about unicorns as well. And if you start reading about skills, there's this concept of the data science or the AI unicorn. And the unicorn is the guy who can just do everything, right? Or the guy or gal who can just do everything. They're machine learning experts, they understand data, they understand analytics, they just know everything. And they're called unicorns because they really don't exist, right? And it can be tempting to just spend ages looking for that person that can do everything. And the real takeaway from this is those people aren't real, or if they are real, they're going to be extremely expensive. So the important thing is to understand who's around the table, right? This is not just something one person is going to do. So when you're evaluating and looking at those AI problems, make sure you have a breadth of skills around that table. Of course, you need people who understand data science, data engineering, but you also need people who understand infrastructure, because the data you're going to use is probably already stored somewhere. So how does that affect the challenge and the problem solving? People who understand the business process, how is that capability in AI going to actually get interlinked with the business processes that you have today? I think I mentioned in a previous session, McKinsey uses this phrase translators to refer to people that know enough about AI to understand what's capable and what's possible, and enough about the business to understand where AI can be applied. They're not AI practitioners, they're not business process experts, but they know enough about both to be able to translate and bring those two domains together. So really important to make sure you have a breadth of skills. And of course, included in that would be making sure management and leadership are, if not at the table, at least understanding what's going on so they're aware and they can be supportive. The other angle to be really careful about is this is still a very diverse domain. There are lots of different platforms and languages and tools and frameworks. It's a very fluid situation. So important to understand that the skills often come hand in hand with a particular expertise in tools and frameworks. So just be open-minded to the fact that there are many different ways to solve a problem, many different tools and frameworks that can be used. So, skills clearly very important, and a very fluid situation there as well to make sure you're on top of. And finally, just wanted to leave you with a few, resources that we didn't really get a lot of time to talk about through the last 6 weeks, but things that you might find interesting as you move forward. These are all hyperlinks. We'll send you the slides out here, but the first one is a list of customer stories and examples. And this is really to help with that concept of transferability. understanding and learning from how others have been doing AI across different industries, different use cases. You'll see when you go here, you can filter out by industries, by use cases, by techniques. And really, this is just a useful way to stimulate ideas when you're having that first discussion with the team around what could we do with AI, where could we apply AI. There's no better way than looking at how others have been using it as a source of inspiration. If you'd like a little bit more training than we've been able to get to here today and want to get something a little bit more hands-on, we have some hands-on training which you can download for free and run on any machine, and it takes you through, it's not going to make you a data science practitioner in a day, but it will take you through the steps of here's what it means to import and clean some data, to build and train a model, and to deploy a model to do a particular task. In this particular case, it's about recognizing makes and models of cars for a fictitious insurance company. So if you've kind of whet your appetite here and really want to actually get hands-on and play with some of this stuff, there's a training there that you can go and use for free and go through in your own time. And a third one, which will kind of feed into some of the panel discussions, is, be ready to look at off-the-shelf or ready-to-go solutions and partners. You might decide that the big learning or the big value you want to take out of an AI project is to learn to do that yourself, and that's perfectly acceptable. You might also decide that you're not in a place to get that expertise yet, but you still want to start getting the benefits of AI. There are countless solutions out there ready to go to solve very particular problems. There are partners such as the partners we've had with us on these calls. All of these are resources that you can tap into. So don't be afraid to tap into those first if what you really want to do is first show the value of AI before starting to invest in your own capabilities. So it's not wrong to go and look off the shelf first if that's the fastest route to proving the value of AI in your particular case. So these are some of the things that just stood out to me. I know we've got the panel discussions coming up, which is hopefully a chance to delve into more detail on these and any other things. But I felt it was just worth doing a very quick recap at the end of our 5th sessions together and the start of the 6th. And I'm looking forward to the panel discussions. So Katja, I'll hand back to you to take care of the roundtables or the panels.
Thank you so much, Chris, for that very clear overview. As Chris already mentioned, is what we're going to do today is we're going to have 2 panels, and Abby was so friendly to have the agenda in the chat box. I had some issues with my PowerPoint just now. So we're going to have 2 panels, a half an hour each. Second panel is on the trends for 2021, but we start with a session or with a panel discussion on build or buy. So given all the off-the-shelf AI solutions that are available today, why would companies need to consider developing their own? And for this panel discussion, we have Chris joining us, and also Walter Riviera, Seppi Puriaya, and Lee Baker. So we're going to have about half an hour of panel discussion. During this panel discussion, we really like to encourage you to use the chat function to add any questions. You can raise your hand. I'll keep an eye on that as well if you want to add something to the discussion. We really like to encourage everyone to ask questions, to participate in the discussion. It's going to be for about half an hour. We're going to have then a few minutes of a break, and then we'll have a second panel on the Trends 2021. But we start with a panel on build or buy. So either building an IA from scratch or buying something off the shelf and anything in between, and having a discussion around that. One of the panelists, Walter, came up with what he called a plan 0. Now, I would like to ask Walter the first question on what is the common mistakes made by companies at the start of the AI journey? What are some of the most common mistakes made by companies at the start of their AI journey, Walter?
Yeah, thanks. So there are many steps that compose an AI development and the adoption of that solution. The step 0, in my opinion, is basically consists in understanding what is the plan. So there's never too much time spent on an initial plan, because that is actually what is going to save time afterwards, and it's actually work smarter than work harder. And one of the common mistakes I'm saying is that a lot of people are are super enthusiastic and super excited about this AI revolution, if you want to call it as it is. And they want to take a step further in that direction, but they are super excited about that. They probably skip some step about understanding what are their business needs. The feeling sometimes is that they need to do AI. They feel like they need to have an AI solution implemented or a service AI based to improve, and they offer and take a step further in the market. So go one step ahead on to the competitive enterprises. But the mistake there is often made in that scenario is that people are doing AI for the sake of doing it. So they rush a little bit on the stages and they adopt something just so they can claim they have some AI-based solution, which is great. But rushing too much can lead to two bad outcomes. The first one is that you end up adapting your business to an AI solution rather than doing the opposite. That is not going to give you a competitive advantage in the long term, right? Because if you go and buy something off the shelf today to use it as a competitive advantage, well, your competitor could do the same. So it's good to kick off, but in the long run, you probably need to consider something else to evolve the situation. And the other thing is to rush things and steps up to the point where you don't understand, you don't have a transparent, clear view on your own business. By that, I mean, data science and data analytics have the great superpowers of providing insights on data. If we look at the right data about our own business and we understand the strength point and the area of development in our own business, that's when we can start a nice plan. And then I would call that as the step zero. And then after that, we know what we might need to do, rather to buy or to implement our own solution. But it all starts with, in my opinion, with an introspective look at what a business is doing, and then eventually go and find a solution that map into those needs. And the common mistake, to summarize it, sometimes it feels like it is the opposite that is happening. People go and look at what is available outside and try to map that into their own business.
Thank you for that, Walter. So looking rather at plan zero first. Any of the other panelists have anything to add to that?
Maybe people start coming off me, but no, I would agree, and I think it just reinforces that outcome. Why are you doing AI? Are you doing it to learn AI, or are you doing it to solve a problem? If you're doing it just because it's the shiny thing, that's not a good reason. So be specific. Try and stay focused on that. Otherwise, as you say, you start to get this drift, and that's not good.
Yeah, I definitely advocate that. There is no harm in toy projects if the function of that project is to learn. In fact, that's a great sandbox to cut your chops and generate your learnings in a safe and pragmatic environment. But yeah, absolutely. If there is a business outcome that hangs on it, then to Chris's point, stay laser focused on that. Course correct as you go, but don't try and avoid bloat. And what is your MVP? What is the minimal success criteria that you're looking to achieve, and make those successes incremental.
Can I ask a question, Katja?
Yes, please, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask the panel whether there was a hybrid between buy and build. So can you rent? I mean, for example, let's say you've got an idea for an AI application and you want to test something out. Can you, in effect, rent an option and trial it prior to any significant commitment, just to see, how it works, to get an idea of what the sort of findings might be? Is that something which the market offers at the moment, or is that a ludicrous suggestion?
Justin, is this your pitch for DLF to become a cloud provider?
No.
It is now. You've put that idea in his head, but
maybe to that point, I think any machine learning AI solution you do build, I guess you are kind of renting it to begin with, because you'll always have to look after it, retrain it, redeploy it, rework it again. I think in previous sessions we mentioned that AI life cycle, there's always the really exciting first steps when you've just got the new product or the new AI service of some sort, and you deploy it out and you're trying it, you A/B test it. It could be off-the-shelf tooling, for example, say Google's Vision API, where you get to test out, does computer vision have a place in my workflow? Does it make people's lives any better in some way? Back to kind of Walter's point about having a plan of what the outcome is. But even when we do release our AI product, it needs to be looked after, needs to be iterated on, right? As soon as it goes into production, it's already degrading in performance in some way, and the world around it is changing, right? The concept that it's trying to characterize is changing. So you end up playing this arms race between your AI learning from the data and iterating on it, and the world around it changing so much that it's no longer a useful product that you put out. So I guess I'm trying to say any AI product that we've got is a rental of some sort. It needs to be iterated upon. There are like lower barrier entry points to trying out those products for sure. But certainly I think it's a good idea to think of it as a rental product in general that needs maintenance forever. As it goes, it's a subscription of some sort that you're going to pay whether you build it internally or use a third party to do it, your AI build.
Yeah, a lot of cloud services will have like free tiers as well. So, Seppi already mentioned Google, but if you look at Azure as another example, I think they've got, computer vision APIs. You can do 5,000 transactions a month for free. So, there are low barriers of entry now. Of course, there's still work to be done to enable that to happen. But yeah, there are certainly ways that you can trial without commit if you've got the skills to get that up and running. So yes, absolutely.
And how's the market moving on this? I mean, are more people building their own or are more people buying? Is there any stats that would reveal that information?
I'll give my view and then I'll offer to others. I mean, I think it's tempting to look at, if you look at AI as a standalone thing, AI is a magic box that does something. That's one way to look at it. The other view is AI will be almost more like an ingredient technology to other solutions. And from that perspective, I think we did some work with IDC recently, and their projection is something like 3/4 of enterprise applications in the coming years will have AI in them. So from that perspective, that's very much a consume it that someone else provides to you rather than having to go build it yourself. You're going to use that capability. I think it tends to be, in my experience, there are people who, when it's some of the more vanilla, like a chatbot, right? People are unlikely to go build their own chatbots because there are so many available that are off the shelf ready. And I think Walter kind of mentioned this. If there's a path to really providing differentiation between you and your competitors, you'll put the effort into developing something yourself. If it's simply about just driving efficiencies through things like chatbot agents or something like that, there's probably not much room for differentiation there. And so probably that's more an off-the-shelf solution. It's very, very crude statement, but if you can't see a path to driving real differentiation, probably you see people more looking at off the shelf, because why reinvent the wheel when there's thousands of perfectly good wheels to choose from? Focus on the things that you really can differentiate on. So that would be my view. Don't know if others have different opinions.
I'd kind of echo a similar sentiment. I think the trend we're seeing is that more more tools are being made available in open source, more frameworks are being made available. We're also getting a lot more models. To go back to what Chris was talking about, transferring knowledge from one type of use case to another, it generalizes to the models themselves. So a lot of kind of big models are being trained by some of the largest companies out there, be it Google, be it Microsoft, putting in the effort to build really large models that we couldn't build individually as companies, and using that to transfer and build our own kind of customized version of that model on top. So I'd say the trend is that more and more open source tooling, more and more models being available for us to pick up and customize to our own needs. AutoML, for example, has a really wonderful space where it gets you up and running with a model quickly. Definitely a growing trend. And building custom models becomes something that you do when it's a core or integral part of your unique selling point of your product, right? When it's really differentiated and a niche that only I have and I'm going to offer to the world. That's when kind of the big custom frameworks come into play.
Neil, Walter, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think Sophie makes the point. Open source is the big disruptor in the build versus buy conversation. The world's biggest or most well-used machine learning framework, TensorFlow, is open source and is by no means an outlier. There are most of the technologies, most of the preferred, I hate the phrase, but most of the state-of-the-art frameworks and technologies are indeed open source or have an open source component. So it's a very good way of being able to cut your teeth, understand the tooling, and then if you do need to kind of escalate to a secure or supported enterprise variant, then that is an option. So it is, I guess, the evolution from build to buy. I might use open source within my frameworks, within my stack, and at the point where I then need to expose that to the business, and I need all of the downscale requirements of enterprise software, that's when I might have to engage and with my vendor and understand actually what the buy requirement looks like. And to that point, I know I've banged this drum before, but data science is a team sport. It is not good enough to satisfy the needs of the data scientist if you're looking to expose that model to the business. Everyone from kind of your DevOps function through kind of engineering, indeed to the business function and procurement, need to understand how that technology is going to be used. How does the business explain itself? How does it interpret those models? These are all requirements from your machine learning frameworks. And so, yeah, I think open source is a fabulous place to start. Certainly kind of the box is open now. There's no rolling back on open source technologies and their place within the ML firmament. And I think this is how we're seeing enterprise grow. They're figuring out, I'm going to maybe run some open source variants in Sandbox. And at the point now when I'm satisfying certain success criteria and I want to expose that to the rest of the business, this is where I potentially need all of the, as I say, the downscale requirements of that software.
The team sport's a great analogy, and I mean we see that happen all the time. I'm actually talking to some of our team internally at the moment. They released a kind of a customer insights capability for the Intel sales force, whereby it's looking at the behavior of customers. What have they gone and bought from our distributors? What information have they looked up online? Is it stuff that's different to what they've done in the past? And so they're kind of trying to predict behaviors amongst the customers such that they help the sales team go and have the right conversations with the customers. And it's been a really interesting journey because these guys have developed a capability, but they don't really understand what the sales engagement looks like and what the customer engagement looks like. So they've developed this package and it's spitting out all this information to us, and we're like, okay, this this is really interesting, but why are you looking at this, and how are these two things related? And so we've gone back and had the conversation where we didn't know you could do that, but actually this would be more helpful than what you've done. And it's kind of an iterative thing of them learning what we need and us learning what's possible. And again, it's back to my comment, who's around the table? And in this case, they went off and developed something a little bit in isolation, but that's okay because they got something up and running and it kind of got the ball rolling. And we're now able to go back and say, well, okay, based on that you've exposed us to, we'd love to see this next. And again, team sport, it's iterative. You're probably not going to get it spot on right the first time, and that's okay because everyone learns as you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Walter, you want to add something to that?
No, just kind of consolidating a little bit the what had been said so far, which I agree with all of that. And I think a good analogy to understand it, to help understand the challenge here, it could be in food in the kitchen, right? So imagine you have the tools, you have open source stuff, you have Python libraries, you have models, intelligent models that are already available from the research. So pretty much anybody can switch off their laptop right now and log into, can switch off the browser and log into another tab and start coding for free and build some intelligent algorithm, right? That stuff is already there. So it's like, if we wanted to cook something, it's like we had access to professional kitchens with all the super expensive tools to prepare whatever 5 stars in a cuisine. But then the choice is, okay, do we go outside and buy some, the perfect roast or whatever, the perfect meal, or do we cook something internally? And that really depends on what you have available in the fridge and what skills do you have to make the magic happen, all right, and somehow. But the availability of tools is already there, so that shouldn't be perceived as a block, a roadblock. What is another consideration that, in my opinion, might help taking this decision is that look at 5 years roadmap or 10 years right down the way. AI is going to be there even more massively than what is already today. So perhaps start a longer path and learning how to cook more professional meals is going to be an investment that is going to pay back in the long run.
All round to Walters for lunch.
Yeah.
Now I'm hungry. No, I think that absolutely makes sense, and it sparked off a thought whilst you were talking, Walter, that the layers of abstraction are going to get more sophisticated too. So the idea that, and with all due respect to my data science colleagues, the idea that we'll be entirely reliant on data scientists for all of our algos, well, that's not even true today, and it's going to be even less true in the future, where more sophisticated interface will allow us to enable the citizen data scientist. The idea of actually I can do some of this modeling myself, and so I think, and we see that already. We see AI is baked into day-to-day applications that we're using, and that will only increase and get more sophisticated. So it will be about, okay, yes, for commercial differentiation, I'm looking for an algo, I'm looking for a model that's really going to leverage the unique data that I have, or my ability to execute. There is always going to be that need, that to Walter's analogy, my 5-star cooked meal, crafted by the hands of a chef. But actually, there's going to be much more prosaic models where it's just a quick beans on toast that I'm able to do myself, and the software tooling will enable me to do that independent of a data scientist.
I love the analogy.
I just heard your analogy, Walter. Apologies.
Yeah, no. I think that's absolutely great. I think it helps us really to visualize that as well. I think that's very important. So we're already heading into the final minutes, but I want to make sure that people in the audience also have that opportunity to ask. So if you have a question at this stage, if you could just unmute yourself and feel free to ask any questions to the panelists. Just want to make sure that we're not missing out on anything. So any of the audience who would like to ask a question at this stage, If not, I'm just going to continue the discussion that we were just talking about, the energy of food, and also how we are implementing AI. How do we get the strategic leadership buy-in? Can we talk a little bit more about that? So at a higher level, who would like to start on that?
Maybe I'll jump onto it to begin with, but I guess it's AI as tooling, right, or capability in your product is something that we know is going to be part of most people's product or day-to-day life, right? So there's things like as simple as product discovery, for example, right? Like recommender systems are everywhere and prevalent, and it's the way that we discover quite a lot of our products out there, and we're used to it. There'll be a part of your strategy that says, what are the expectations of the user? That's just the minimum. This is the way they interact with the world, and AI is becoming kind of a go-to requirement for some of that. And then there'll be other parts where we're saying we want something tailored and completely differentiated. That's going to be my IP, that's going to be my unique area of either user interaction or differentiation from other vendors. And that's where the kind of leadership strategy needs to come together to decide what's the direction we want to go in. How smart do we want our products to be? How individual do we want that experience to be with our products and our services? And how far into the future do we want to be able to forecast or predict the unique elements of our company? That's typically with digital leaders in the organization. You may have people that look after AI and data strategy, but it's certainly, yeah, I really like the idea. Certainly a team sport, right? There's even at leadership level, if you're going to make that decision to invest into AI strategically, it's quite a number of different digital technologists, product owners, business units. You're going to have to come together in order to decide, are we going to are we going to invest heavily here? How are we going to test it? How do we measure it? How do we know this is a good direction for us? It's a team sport even at leadership level.
Yeah, definitely. I think success and expectation management. So success in the sense of, let's be clear and define what success looks like, and not you know, the moonshots are great and they have their place. You know, certainly in kind of in a current time where everyone is looking for the moonshot for tackling COVID, and actually those are the types of projects that should galvanize and should make us aspirational. But on a more day-to-day business level, you define success as, can we productionize a model? You know, is that our basic success criteria? Can we satisfy that out of the box? Make that clear that that is your success criteria, and maybe have your aspirational goals kind of you know, cascade from that. But be clear about what success looks like. Share that success and share it up as well as down, and say, okay, well, if this is a building block to kind of really kind of revolutioning our business through AI and machine learning, what are the increments? What are our success milestones that we would need to achieve? And that's what I mean about expectation management. Be clear about, why is that a success? You know, for me to say productionize a model, oh, well, that's easy. He just said productionize model is done. I click my fingers and make it so. Well, actually, no, that's problematic for a business, because you want to make that repeatable, and you want to make that scalable, and you want to make that managed, and you want to make that monitored. So again, coming back to, who needs to be involved in these successes, so that should I repeat it, I have all of the touch points, and who needs to share in these successes so that they feel confident to go on to the next milestone of success. So I think, yeah, that's definitely I think a way of winning hearts and minds.
So success milestones. Any final remarks from one of our other panelists on this?
I think it's good explanation so far. I think, again, just think in the language of the person you have to get the buy-in from. What do they care about? They don't really care about AI. They care, well, they probably know they need to understand it because everyone else is talking about it, but AI isn't an outcome. Talk about outcomes. You know, the outcome is more competitiveness or better retention, or whatever the outcome is you think you can derive by investing in this. That's the thing you need to focus on. I think that's not unique to AI, by the way, but in particular with AI, because it's so easy to get dazzled by all the flashy things, it's really important to bring it back to, well, why would the person paying the money really care about doing this? And because it's AI isn't a good answer. So outcome first.
Yeah, and a final remark from my side is, you know, like in all the challenges and all the new projects and adventures, a little bit of courage is absolutely required, right? From whomever is listening, because I've seen many times people are like, I need to prove that if I adopt an AI solution to my management, that is going to improve the situation, but I can't, because the only way I could demonstrate there is value for us to adopt it is that I already have it implemented. So it's a kind of a chicken and egg. And it's like, AI comes with a lot of research by definition. You got to understand what you're doing. You got to understand who you are, what are your pain points. And that is a lot of time in researching, right? And finding those answers. So a little bit of courage. And I would like to leave you with this example in terms of courage in exploring new area, especially in the business, in the business perspective. When the internet was like becoming a big thing, taxi driver were already there, and taxi company were already there as well. And most of them thought, okay, how can we take advantage of this big technology, which is the internet, right? This is going to impact everybody. And so what they'd done was to create their own websites, and people could book the taxi and eventually see where the location of the agency were. And then Uber came up and disrupted completely the way of delivering the taxi service, right? Because they built their own business, their own mission around the internet. And thanks to that, they got the success they actually ended up having. So AI is a kind of the internet nowadays, and so, you know, with a little bit of courage and nice thinking, probably a little bit of planning as well, maybe you can end up being the next Uber.
Well, thank you for that. Another analogy, Walter, that was very useful indeed. And we got back to that planning aspect of it as well, where you started with. That's how it all starts, the planning, the point zero. So we're going to slowly close off this panel. We give everyone about 1 or 2 minutes.
Katja, yeah. We got a question from, if you look in the chat.
Yes. So what I want to do is, so I want to say to everyone, we have about 1 or 2 minutes that we're closing this off. There is a few questions that I'll ask in those 2 minutes. And then we're going to the next panelist. So thank you for mentioning that, Justin. But if you need to grab quickly another coffee, we'll start the next panel in about 2 or 3 minutes. Like Justin already said, we have Lalita Corpora, who had actually a quick question. If you're looking to build up a team to start implementing AI within the business, what would you say are the 3 key hires to get it in the team first? So I'll ask that to our current panel while we're making up for the next one. So any one of the current panel, Chris, Seppi, Lee, Walter, if you want to.
I would say stick with the kitchen analogy, right? What are you planning to cook? Is that a seafood meal? Is that a meat meal? Is there a vegetarian meal? And then go high what you need. So define what you're trying to achieve. And then if you are struggling in understanding what you're trying to achieve, then probably the first answer is you need somebody that is able to look at your own data and find that answer out. So that is going to recommend you that the 3 key hires I would expect to have at least, I don't know, a financial or a data analyst in there. So you can have an initial hint, right? And then look at what you're lacking. If you have a great pool of data scientists or people with that experience and a little bit of research as well, but you don't have super skilled software developer, probably that's what we're gonna might look at. Or alternatively, if you already have a data scientist talent in your team, as well as a good software development, but you don't know what you can go next. And again, having a clear goal in mind to achieve, probably you might want to consider somebody on the IT, like infrastructure side, because at some point you need to productize, as Lee was mentioning before, that solution. You need to scale that. So having those skills as well is going to be important. So there's no one solution, in my opinion, one answer to this question, but it's an extremely, it can be more addressable and easily answerable if you have a clear goal in mind.
Having a clear goal in mind. Any of the other panelists want to add something to that?
Maybe I'll jump in and say, you know, first steps could always be go to a partner of some sort to build a solution that fits you, and then the solution kind of dictates what you might need to hire around to maintain, look after, and iterate on that solution. But if you've gone through that and you've decided, yeah, I want machine learning in production in some way, data scientists as a role are very flexible usually on what they work with, from analytics to building out your proof of concepts of some sort. Your first models get built with your data science team, and the machine learning engineer is another role that usually picks up in tuning, scaling, and operationalizing some of those models as well, is another useful role to have. But these all need to complement an existing infrastructure team, an existing software development team as well. So I'd say a good way to start is work with a partner, build something that you need, and then you'll understand some of your requirements there. After that, you can start investing in a whole bunch of different ways.
Yeah. So starting with a partner and the importance of that too. So thank you, Seppi and Walter, for answering that question. We're now going to head into our second panel. We're going to look at the trends for 2021. Like I said, during the panel, please feel free to ask your questions in the chat or just raise your hand so I know that you have a question up. I'll keep on monitoring that. You don't need to wait until the end. So even during the discussions you can do. So our next panel will be on the trends for 2021. And then particularly on that, given governments worldwide are paying more and more attention to AI regulatory concerns, what should companies wishing to implement their AI be careful of? And for this panel discussion, we'll have Sue McLean from Baker McKenzie back, Joe Harrod from Signify, and Riccardo Masucci from Intel. And I actually wanted to start with Riccardo, because when we were doing our preparations for this panel, Riccardo, you mentioned kind of three main topics for 2021. And I was wondering if you could start explaining what you consider to be like the main topics for 2021 will be. Riccardo?
Sure. Thanks a lot, Katja, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I was actually out of these three areas, I was actually thinking of developing a couple of aspects and maybe leave the third one for a deeper discussion. But the three aspects that we discussed were a big push for regulation, a clear acknowledgement of the need for improving data access and data sharing, and the third aspect that I mentioned is this emphasis on data flows worldwide that would certainly influence developments on for autonomous technologies. If we stick to the first of these aspects, the idea of regulating AI, this has become more and more prominent over the past 2-3 years in the regulatory space. So policymakers worldwide are interested in cracking the problems related to the deployment and adoption of artificial intelligence. I counted more than 30 countries around the world that have developed over the past 3 years their own national AI strategy. We see in the context of European institutions, but also other international organizations like the Council of Europe in Strasbourg or the OECD in Paris, that they are creating committees with the aim of understanding if there are opportunities for creating legal frameworks for artificial intelligence around the world. What is the main focus of all these regulatory legislative efforts? Ethics, discrimination, bias, human rights, privacy. Those come probably at the first, in the first position, or are very prominent in the discussion. I see an increased interest in liability issues around AI. Some policymakers are also looking at specific uses of AI that have some high risk in adoption and especially deployment. So there is also a sectoral approach, let's say, to AI that will be increasingly developed next year. We expect, the European Commission, for instance, to come up with its own data Governance Act and a number of other initiatives related to AI. And last but not least, the focus of these initiatives is linked to data governance. And data governance is not just only AI specific, but it really impacts the ability of developing AI. And so in these days, the UK government has an open consultation on its data strategy. The European Union is launching its own Data Governance Act tomorrow. India as a big, massive data strategy under discussion. China has started discussing their privacy framework. So all this to say that data governance within an organization is becoming more and more important. And so to summarize, and back to your question, what I would say, out of all these initiatives, we can understand there will be more scrutiny, and so there will be more need for resources allocated for legal compliance. But at the same time, this might translate also to more predictability for businesses, and so in a way more legal certainty. It is important in this context also to try to adopt a number of technical, contractual, organizational measures in our kitchens, let's say, to be ready while we wait for policymakers' recipes to get AI right. And again, more attention to data governance, because this is going to be a big focus for 2021 and beyond.
Sue or Lee, what would you like to add to that, to those trends that we see in 2021?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Ricardo. We were told that 2020 was going to be the year for regulatory action on AI, and it's still, we're still kind of waiting. And there's sort of two, it seems to me around the world, there's sort of two categories of thought. One is that we absolutely need to go ahead and regulate. And we've seen the EU come out with some pretty high level proposals, but obviously thinking that they're going to go down that route for high risk applications of AI, and talking about, sort of duty of care and making sure we focus on making sure the regulations fit for purpose. I think you have other categories, of countries who are still at the let's wait and see. And I think it's interesting where the UK will go post-Brexit, because certainly there are a lot of people that think the EU have got a good argument, but there's also a lot of folks in the UK who think actually this could be a competitive advantage for us if we don't think there's gaps in the regulatory framework, that we can kind of push ahead with our being a good place to do AI and make us more competitive. So it'll be interesting to see, I think, in the UK who wins that argument. I think from things we saw published in the past, Cummings was very pro the divergence from an EU perspective around AI. But nonetheless, as Ricardo says, the regulators are on the case. They're very interested. We've had more guidance out from the data protection regulator in the UK, and companies are going to have to make sure that they are, you know, following good practice, particularly around the topics we've discussed. I think the other interesting area on the regulatory side are some of the issues that kind of been picked up in the chat, that, you know, there are other regulators looking in this space. The competition authorities in particular are very focused on the use of data and, you know, who has the data and what they do with the data. And they're working more closely with other regulators like the ICO and other data protection regulators. But also it'll be interesting to see what the impact of new developments like the National Security and Investment Bill have on the AI sector, because there's a lot of concern in the technology sector that this new piece of legislation could inhibit growth because it's so broad. And, you know, if you're just going to invest in an AI company, 15%, you'd have to make a mandatory antitrust filing. And so it'll be interesting to see how that progresses, because, you know, that again could have a dampening effect on the sector. So definitely regulatory, you know, keeping your eye on what's happening on the regulatory side and making sure that as part of your team around AI, you've got your legal and regulatory folks kind of embedded right from the beginning. I think it's going to increasingly be important to show that you are doing those proper risk assessments at each journey of that life cycle, to make sure that you are looking at, you know, what the risks could be, what the outcomes could be, whether the AI tool works exactly as it's meant to, but still there's harm, or it doesn't work and goes off piste and you have to deal with the consequences. So more deployment, but hopefully more nuanced understanding of the legal and regulatory compliance risks. And also, I guess my plea would be to the technical people and the business people is that if you want to get your legal and compliance people on board, talk their language. You know, don't have lots of jargon.
Oh, I looked at you.
That was me. Try and translate it for them, because if you want to onboard, you know, if you want to deploy and move to development and deployment faster, you need to get those people on site. And so explaining and translating for them, you know, what the tool is, what it does, what it doesn't do, early on is going to be really helpful.
So yeah, just try to translate it, trying to work together. So how can it help, you know, ethical decisions help to be the driving force actually for success? And perhaps that's a good question for Joe to ask. How can it actually be a driving force rather than it?
Yeah, I think that's from Joe. It'd be great to hear that, because that's what I think is that increasingly it should be, you know, doing the right thing from an ethical perspective, a legal perspective. It's a differentiator, it's competitive advantage. It's not a hurdle you have to get over. It's a badge of honor that you've done it properly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's completely right, Sue, and it cues me up nicely in terms of, I think that next year, or perhaps the next 3 to 5 years, we'll see an increasing embrace of the importance of kind of cultural responsibility within organizations. So I was actually slightly disagreeing that there is any opportunity within divergence. I think divergence from ethical and legal standards is going to be a pipe dream. The clients that we work with that have the most serious governance are kind of, I mean, to them, GDPR is far in the rearview mirror. At one time, they would have thought that was a big hurdle, but now they're very, very focused on the latest legislation that's going to come out of California and what's going to result from antitrust legislation against the big social platforms, and, you know, how new privacy charters everywhere from Australia to California are going to set a new and even higher bar. So I think that feeds into Sue's point that legal compliance it stops being a headache for one department, and instead over the next 3 to 5 years, hopefully, will become something that is understood by everyone in the business in terms of, do we know what the objective of our machine learning program is and what the benefit is for external customers or third parties or for the business, and ownership of that responsibility and considerateness in the application of AI will go way, way beyond the core team that are charged with dealing with it. So I think that will be a big trend in the next 3 years. I think the other thing that is going to happen and has been partly catalyzed by the disastrous kind of hype around AI as a solution to something like test and trace is that in the next 2 years, we'll have another one of these things where people will say, journalists will say the AI bubble has burst. A few very high profile clients in the government will say AI doesn't fix all these problems. And it's like, well, it never was going to. It's still a marvelous, transformative, incredible wave of technology. But I think in the next 2-3 years, we will see a bit of a kind of a questioning of what AI can do. And I hope that will be really positive and will empower people to have much more realistic programs and to take questions like governance as something that can't just be done by designing your software or your program properly. So I would like to see a trend away from, oh, we can adjust for unintentional bias with another program that we plug in on top of it. I think all the big players are going to realize, no, unfortunately we need to pay people to sit alongside our software programs, and there needs to be a role that is in charge of bias, a role that is in charge of unintended consequences, because without people, this stuff can spiral out of control. So I think my two big trends are an embrace of culture and of considerateness and compliance way, way outside the legal team, but obviously relying incredibly hard on the work of people like Sue. And then a kind of an acceptance that just because this technology is limited doesn't mean it isn't going to change the world.
I was just going to add that I think the education piece is so important, not just for within an organization in terms of translating it for the business, people and the legal people, but to be honest, also for the policymakers and politicians, because, it's an easy excuse in the media to say it was a rogue algorithm. We all know it was not, someone designed that. It worked the way it was meant to. We just didn't like the outcome. And so trying to have an engage, we've got a rebooted parliament. I think if, whether we have regulation or as, we as good companies bring in proper good governance kind of on a self-regulatory basis to a certain extent, we do need to continue to speak to the policymakers to really educate them about what AI is and what it's not, and what, how we talk about it. Because as you say, there's some risks, but it's a very positive technology that can do a lot of good. We got to talk about it in the right way, and not let people just, make unhelpful statements. I think, particularly where that doesn't help us as an AI community in the UK, kind of continue to push forward the great work we're doing.
Yeah, probably to echo what Sue and Joe are saying, probably we need a sort of cultural shift both internally and externally, in the sense that we need the discussion between policymakers and tech sector to be more open and constructive in order to really emphasize all the good things that are brought by this AI revolution, and industry has to find the right ways to communicate this properly and to educate policymakers. At the same time, industry needs to have a cultural shift in terms of proactive measures taken internally to minimize risks, to embed a different type of reasoning throughout the life cycle. And this goes back to the point that was made by Chris in his introduction on accountability. So I think this could be a very promising development if we can achieve this cultural shift internally and externally.
I see already some chats are coming in, so thank you for your contributions also in the chat. As we talk a little bit about, how we also need to educate and be open in what we are doing. Joe was mentioning earlier about perhaps not a good example about the test and trace in the UK, but what is a kind of a positive example of where you see that has gone well, any of the panelists, where they started that discussion in a good manner?
Well, I'll go first because I'm good at ad-libbing. but I was actually thinking, my mind was whirring, and I was thinking about clients that we work with at the big financial services and personal finance end of the spectrum. Thank you so much.
This is mine.
Amazing. I was thinking that some of the best interventions that we have seen are also some of the most morally or ethically requiring acuity end of the spectrum. So in the media world, we've seen really good personalization of content and algorithmic recommendation and curation. And that's something that everybody in the world can understand, because they get how Netflix is more addictive than watching Sky. But in the finance space, there has been an awful lot of intervention which has accelerated through the pandemic at a very basic programmatic but machine, deep learning enabled level to understand debt, problem behavior, signs of distress. And you have to be very, very careful about how you do that work, because it creates, by its very nature, it categorizes people really rapidly. But we have seen some really, really good examples there, and probably experienced them. I've been reached out to by algorithms to say, you are a small business, are you in distress? What's going on? I've been reached out to some that are just kind of marketing algorithms, but others that have gone, oh, that's really good that you're telling me about a grant pool or whatever it is. So I've seen some really, really good applications in the financial services space, and evidence that they have been done incredibly thoughtfully. And on the client side, we know that that space takes time to think about unintended consequences and to cleanse for the effect of categorizing their customers, because they realize that life changes and people can be categorized one way this month, and then you need to refresh your data set pretty rapidly.
This year, the COVID has probably boosted one trend that was already there, AI in healthcare, right? And so really the acknowledgement by policymakers that we need to strike a balance between what is scientific research and protection of individuals. And so it's fascinating how it is coming also from public authorities and policymakers. This call for an improved access to data, and initiatives to improve also data sharing for scientific research purposes. So this is back to your question, Katja, an area where I see this there are positive developments, and this dialogue and openness is bringing some concrete results.
Yeah, all I was going to say is that obviously we act for lots of different clients across different industry sectors, and I think some of to me, because it's sort of less mature industries in terms of digital transformation, it's really interesting for me to talk to my colleagues and clients in, for example, the EMI industry group, or the IMT, industrials, manufacturing, transportation, because I think someone said before, AI is one tool, but often this is, they're seeing great transformational power from a combination of technologies. So, putting sensors out in the field to monitor equipment and bring data back. And some of these, often some of these use cases, the aim really is, to make things more efficient, to save money, but there's also health and safety benefits. If you can't get people out there, you can get technology, you can get drones collecting the data, bringing it back, and they can analyze it from a health and safety perspective. That's really helpful, but also from a sustainability perspective. If you can identify that equipment needs fixing before it becomes kind of fatally damaged and you'll need to replace it, you have less churn of equipment, you're reducing your footprint. Monitoring energy use so that you can reduce it to help with sustainability targets around climate change and etc. So to me, there's lots of interesting use cases. I think from a legal perspective, what really encourages me, and we've touched on this already, is clients companies that are taking this really seriously from a legal and a ethical, sort of a responsible use of technology perspective. So they are doing sort of as part of the feasibility or part of the mobilization of these projects, they are really thinking in a sort of joined up way, and they are bringing the relevant stakeholders together. You know, you do see some companies still getting very excited by, you know, somebody has tried to sell something to somebody in the innovation team and they bring it in, and it is kind of playing, and that might be fine if it's just exploration. But the more sort of experienced, credible organizations are, you know, identify the value of technology, but they also think carefully about the implications, and those include, you know, reputational and issues, and also broader stakeholders. No, it's not just perhaps the customers or the employees, it's a community. You know, it could be a town, it could be other stakeholders in a community where they're deploying some of this technology, which has, you know, consequences they're not quite expecting. How do they mitigate for those legally, contractually, and kind of from a operational perspective?
Thank you for that, Sue. I hope that also answers, I saw Stuart questions about most successful examples. Stuart, does that answer your question there as well?
I was going to say that it does, and there's been a lot of good comments in the chat. So one of the things I am interested in is actually what happens when these AI studies hit real life. We've seen plenty of well-publicized studies, because effectively what they are, and trials, but following them up sort of 6 months, a year later, it looks like they've been far less successful.
I completely agree, Stuart. And I've been in a lot of boardrooms when a Capgemini or other consultancies exist, have drawn a picture on the wall that has a box in the middle called AI. And you could see all the developers and engineers in the room just sit back and go, okay, what's that? What is that magic box in the middle of the diagram going to do? But I think this course has really made me think so much about the judgments that I've projected onto people who overhype something, because actually, I think you and I, Stuart, are very skeptical about hype and overpromise and presenting AI as a panacea. And I've always thought that the kind of overclaims for machine learning in the space of healthcare were the worst, because they waste doctors' time, and it's very rare to find something that wastes doctors' time on an industrial scale, you know, tens of thousands of hours of doctors' time. And I always thought that was awful, but actually, in a society that fundamentally needs to, in a world that needs to fail and have experiments, it may seem appalling that the first few oncology programs, when the rubber hit the road and they became practical, were complete failures and had to go back to the drawing board, but they had to happen. And as we see from the chat, there are lots and lots of medical advances, and even the fragments of those first oncology programs in terms of improved diagnostics, improved patient onboarding, small changes in patient care. I think some of the legacy of it is really worth having as well. So this course has actively changed my thinking about, you know, my judgmental side, where I dislike the hype around AI, and I've begun to realize there is a role for the hype man who comes in and gets everyone excited, and you have a couple of high profile failures, but then you're on a path.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think the other thing about hype that's unhelpful is from a, you know, selfishly from a legal and regulatory perspective, because it gets, you know, I've definitely had clients who have been told that the business wants to go ahead with a particular AI project, and it's with a third party. It involves a tool that's been, you know, sold as this very sophisticated AI tool. And that leads to lots of questions about what it can and can't do, and whether, you know, the company wants to own the IP in that tool because it's so market leading. And actually, when you get under the skin of it and really cut through the kind of path and figure out what does it actually do, you know, sometimes it's quite basic decision tree type software, and it's not as sophisticated or as exciting. That's not necessarily a bad thing, though, because it means from a legal and regulatory perspective, it's less complicated, it's more straightforward, and you can move ahead. So there's I agree that you kind of, the excitement is helpful, but in a way, yeah, the trend is towards being more transparent and being more sensible and being more realistic about what things can do and what they can't do. That will also help more generally with, you know, speeding up getting approval through legal, honestly.
I think those are beautiful ways to close this panel for this moment, because I'm conscious of the time. Thank you all the panelists for your contributions. As always, we leave the lines open after 1:30 if you want to ask another question, because I don't want to cut everyone off in that sense, but that is a great way of finishing it off. I want to just give the final words to either Chris or Justin, or actually both of them, to just close off this session for this year. And then we'll, yeah, first up to Justin. Yeah, it's 1:30 with me, Jack. Sorry, it's 12:30 with you. I'm just 1 hour ahead of you all. Justin or Chris, do you want to start?
Chris, okay if I go first? Yeah, well,
always, Justin, go ahead.
Well, I'd just like to thank everyone for their insights and their contributions today. And there are a couple of points that I really agreed with. I mean, I really agree with Sue on the need to educate policymakers. I think that's absolutely critical, because I kind of sympathize to a degree with what Joe's saying about you do need the people who are generating the hype, but they may not necessarily be consciously developing hype. They may just be genuinely excited by the possibilities that they see in front of them, and that's what triggers innovation. So I think we're at a really interesting stage here, because I think clearly we can all see, everyone here can see, and there's evidence that, you know, AI can transform businesses. We're starting to see, has the ability to do that, and we're starting to see individual use cases and potential for that to happen. At the same time, I think that there's got to be some sort of careful calibrating of the innovation and the progress, whereby there's lots of things happening in tandem, you know, education of the policymakers, companies looking at, you know, issues like diversity of data, governance, people being involved to check for bias, plus, you know, getting teams together, building business cases and making it work. So I think that this is a technology for innovators. There's no question about it. And I think that different companies coming together, sharing ideas, sharing their experiences and articulating the issues can only help. And I think that today has been really useful to help clarify some of the challenges and the opportunities that lie in front of us. And you know, I hope that people feel that they are more empowered now as a consequence of the sessions they've been on, to be able to contribute in a meaningful way to the scaling of AI across their organizations and across wider society.
Chris?
Yeah, I guess not much more to add than that. Just a couple of comments based on the last discussion. I mean, AI hype, yeah, absolutely, we see that a lot, but then it's not the first thing that's been hyped up beyond where it should be, and it certainly won't be the last either. And I think you should apply the same kind of healthy skepticism to AI that you would to any other thing that promises to be magic and solve all the world's problems. So, you know, yes, those things are true with AI. They've been true for previous things. They'll be true again. So expectation setting and scope is important, again, like with other things. And I think it was Sue made the comment in the chat, you know, failure isn't failure if you learn something from it. And again, if that's part of the expectation that you set about the adoption of AI, we are going to fail. This is going to go through phases where it's not working, and that's okay, because here's what we do in those cases. That's all just part of the adoption of anything new. It just happens to be AI right now. So, and I think the only other comment was, forgive me if I get the person wrong and attribute it wrongly. It might have been Joe, or it might have been somebody else for a previous session, but there was the advice to, there's nothing wrong with going for a moonshot project, because that's the thing that's really going to get the attention, but probably best to counter that with a couple of smaller wins as well. You know, don't do one or the other. It may have been someone else who said that, but a little bit of both is good. You know, small things get you success, but they might not generate huge excitement. You know, go for a moonshot as well, because if it succeeds, it really moves things forward. But again, all down to expectation setting, and healthy skepticism is fine. So nothing more to add than that, I think.
Well, that leaves me then to just thank all the panelists and all the participants for today for a very insightful session and panel discussion. Like I say, we'll open the lines for another 10 to 15 minutes. So if you need to go, then feel free to do so. Abby has added a little survey to this as well. As I said in the start of our session, this is not the last AI session we're going to do. We're going to have a lot more in 2021, but we really want to make sure that those are the most beneficial ones to the members. So do fill in the survey and let us know what you would like to see covered for next year. It ends with this series for 2020, but in 2021, we're going to do a lot more because the discussion is far from over.